It's coding time with Coding Cleverly. Today's video is going to be about another sorting algorithm. The previous video we discussed about selection sort, and we discussed how to create it, and we also looked at the code and also explained how it works. Today we're going to be explaining bubble sort algorithm, also another sorting algorithm. So the same thing we're going to do is basically first write the code and then explain it alongside, and also give a proper detailed explanation at the end. So hash include IOStream, and then we have the using namespace standard. And before I'm doing all of this, I should save this as some kind of file. So I'll call this as bbl sort.cpp. Okay, now it's saved as this file format, and I'm gonna be creating I'll say in main logic, and then the return 0. So I'm gonna create bubble sort algorithm. So for that, I would have to have the swap function just like we did for a selection sort. So I'll have void swap, and it would pass into an array. It would have the x element, it would also have the y element. And what would it basically do is basically have a temporary variable, and it would associate to the x value. And then after that, it would have the x value, so let's say x, and that would be equaling to the y. And then would have the y value, which is that, and that would be equaling to the temporary variable. So that's our swapping function done. Now let's create our bubble sort algorithm. So it's basically gonna be called bbl sort, and what it's basically gonna intend to do is gonna have an array, and it's gonna have the size of the array. Okay, so the body of the bubble sort is basically pretty simple. It has an I is equal to 0 because it's going to start from the 0th index. And what's going to be the difference between this one and the other one is that this one is going to start from the end, while selection sort was starting from the beginning. Alright, the process of bubble sort is pretty similar to what we did with selection sort, but the thing is that this is going to start from the very end, and it's going to go and bubble its way to the beginning. And what I mean by bubbling its way is, like, suppose we have a liquid base at the bottom, and then we know that the bubble is actually lighter because the liquid is more dense, and the lighter thing goes on the top, right? It floats to the top, it bubbles its way to the top. So if we see some element that is larger, all right, it would be in the bottom, like the liquid, it's larger. And something that is lighter, like a lighter element, like let's say a number that is smaller, would be on the top. So it would search a number, and it would say if it's 10, and if they're on the top, it would be 5. Okay, so that is okay. But if I see some number and I go up my step 1, so I just keep on looking at two elements. So when I looked at 10 and 5, now I go and look at 5 and let's say 7. Now we know 5 and 7, now 7 is larger, so now it's going to swap the function. So 7 is going to go down and 5 is going to go on the top because 7 is larger, more heavier. So, and that's just one bubble process. It could take multiple bubble processes to simply arrange data set. So how do I basically do this is, like, if we looked at selection sort over here, we had it completely different. We had it started from the beginning, and we had to go and actually search for the smallest element for one specific entry. So, and one specific entry point, we had I in some location like 0 if we were in the beginning. J was also in the beginning with 0, but it had to check inside of the loop, and if it saw some element that had a value which was smaller than I, right? So it would just basically swap that value, and that would basically it would say that it would return the value that was smallest, and then after finding that smallest, it would swap the value, and then it would just increment and until the whole thing is sorted. Similar to that, what we're gonna have is we're gonna have a bubble sort. We have a I is equal to 0 because that's the start of the indexed. We're gonna go from n minus 1. And this means that it's going to go from the 0th all the way to the last element. It's going to use this proper mechanism called bubble, and we're going to create this bubble function, which is going to basically accept an array and also the size. So it looks pretty familiar to you because of the selection sort. And then it's just going to increment I++, and that's pretty simple, straight to the point. Okay, now after this, let's create our bubble function. So I'm just going to create it right here, and what's a bubble function going to do is going to have a return type of void, and let's say the bubble, and basically it's going to have an array. So we have an array and also the size of the array, so the size of the array is over here as well. Okay, the bubble function is going to basically implement some specific thing. It's going to start with I, and it's going to go to n minus 1. So it's gonna go I to n minus 1, which is the last element. And that's what I told you about bubble sort, that it starts from the very end of the array. So end of the array meaning the last element, and that's positioned in the n minus 1 location. And what it does is that basically while the I is greater than 0, because that's the starting point and that's how we're gonna implement the array, what we're gonna do is basically have an if condition. And the condition is that if the array sub I, all right, is smaller, we see on the top number, if it's smaller, so we'd say if a sub I, or we say the value of the other one, which is a sub I minus 1, if that thing is greater, right, and your smaller thing is bottom, just swap it, because you want that greater position on the bottom. That's what it clearly means. So swap that function, so swapping with a, I, and then we have the last element, which is I minus 1. So I hope that made sense. Swap function was already defined, and now after that we're just going to keep on naturally decrementing, because we're going from n minus 1, so we're just essentially decrementing. And then we have just the display function left, so we could just say void, let's say show this time, and it's going to create pass in an array, so let's say array, and also it's going to pass in the I would say the size of the array. And now what we could do inside of this is basically have pretty much the simpler case, is equal to 0. Let's create a while loop, and we'll say I is less than n, and we say console output the array, and then we'd have the value of I, just have a comma here, put that over here, and just keep on incrementing. And there you go. So now after that, let's have an array over here, defined array, some random numbers inside of it. So let's just give them some garbage values. There you go. I think that's enough. Okay, so now let's have a size variable defined, and the size variable will have a size of the entire array divided by the size of the int value, and then we're gonna have the function called, so we're just gonna say show. We're gonna have the array passed in with the size, and let's see how if it displays. So if it displays, it means our code is working properly. Yes, it's working, so we can see our array is displayed, and it's unsorted. So yeah, so now after that, let's sort the function. So let's create, basically we're gonna have to call bubble sort. So bubble sort, and now it's gonna ask for an array, it's gonna ask for the size of the array, and it's gonna also now we're gonna have to show the array. So we're gonna say show, we're gonna pass in the array, we're gonna pass in the size of the array, and hopefully now everything will be understood. So we could see over here that, okay, so the thing actually worked. We could see that it started from here, and yeah, so it basically did something over here, and I'm gonna have to actually have an end line in my show function to see what's going on. Okay, so we have an end line over here, and now if I run the code, okay, so over here we have 12, and then we have 193 and 193, and then this and this. Okay, so strangely we have some values that are not basically in this portion here that were unsorted, and now over here, which is 12, 12, 19, 193, 193. Okay, so it basically sorted it. Awesome. The formatting basically made me a little confused, and I thought that my code didn't work properly for some reason. But now I understood that because of proper formatting, like right after this end line, I had this \n, which is the carriage return. That made my code more reasonable and more understandable, that this was the second process and this was my second function call. I hope you understood the concept of bubble sort. If you like this video, please leave a like, and also comment down below if you want to know anything else about bubble sorts, if you want a little more proper I don't know, more in-depth detail of bubble sort or any other selection sort, whatever sorting algorithm. If you want the code for this, it would be available in my GitHub repository. The link will be in the description. Please don't forget to subscribe. That was, I don't know. And we will see you guys in the next video. Thank you. Peace out.